We've talked about one of my favorite, newest adaptations of Frankenstein from Guillermo del Toro on the channel, but now it's time to talk about one of the weirdest adaptations of Frankenstein to have ever existed.
I see you shiver with anticipation.
Welcome back, everyone. We're here to talk about Rocky Horror Picture Show, and I know what you're thinking. Amanda, that's not a new movie. No, it is not. But I did have a subathon recently, and as part of a prize for that subathon, one of my community members, Chris, asked me to do a review of this film. And let me tell you, you do not know how many times I have watched this film in my life. I could recite to you parts of Rocky Horror. I could maybe recite to you the entire movie. When I was watching it, I was mouthing the words along with the actors. That's how many times I've watched it. This is a film for me that I haven't watched in a few years, so I did want to rewatch it before I did this review and not just speak off the cuff, because I also wanted to come at it with more of a reviewer's eyes, I guess. Let me see with my reviewer's eyes. I want to know before I get into it too, what are your thoughts on Frankenstein adaptations and classic adaptations? And what are some of your favorites? Is this one of them? Do you even consider this to be a Frankenstein adaptation? Let me know in the comments. If you don't know about Rocky Horror Picture Show, it is a film adaptation of the stage musical, The Rocky Horror Show, which I actually have played in before. I was one of the chorus members, and yes, I did do the time warp again. This is a cult classic film that released back in the 70s, and something that surprised me about it when I went back after watching it to just see, like, what are recent reviews of Rocky like? I found that the viewpoint for this film surprised me in the modern day. On Rotten Tomatoes, it's at, I think, 85%, 81% critic, 85% audience score. Oh. So a lot of people like this movie, and going back, I have to say, I was surprised at how well crafted this movie actually is. The film is directed by Jim Sharman with a screenplay from Richard O'Brien and Jim Sharman. Richard O'Brien, I believe, did the original stage show. So the two of them came together and kind of gave us this screenplay. And it stars Tim Curry as Frank-N-Furter, Susan Sarandon as Janet, and Barry Bostwick as Brad, to name a few. It's crazy that Susan Sarandon is in this. I forget every time, and then I watch it and I'm like, oh yeah, Susan Sarandon as Janet. It was made with a pretty modest budget of just over $1 million, and it went on to gross $166 million. Initially, I believe the theatrical release for this film did not go well. People weren't showing up, the screenings weren't going well, and then they were able to convince people to do midnight screenings of it. They reworked the poster, reworked like some of the marketing, and re-released it in theaters, and then it started to take off, and it actually went on to make $166 million. Going back to take a look at this movie, it's clear why this film did so well, because although it is very weird as a premise, especially if you're not familiar with the musical at all, the way that it's crafted is actually so well done. I mean, it pays such good homage to the musical, and of course the music in it sounds great. It is the same music as the stage show, but there's also so many little Easter eggs in the early scenes. When we're at the wedding scene with Brad and Janet, where their friends are getting married and Brad proposes to Janet. At the beginning of the scene, if you pay attention in the background, you can see Frank-N-Furter, Magenta, Riff Raff as kind of the priest and the farmers on the property. It's pretty crazy. Just like that continues throughout the movie, by the way. There's lots of little hints in the dialogue at things that are to come to pass. There's lots of foreshadowing in this film. It's just very well structured in terms of what it shows you visually and even what it gives you with the screenplay. Even though it's a really weird film, I'm not going to deny it. I also love the way that they incorporate the narrator into the story. When you watch the stage show, the narrator is kind of usually like tucked off to the side doing stuff, and I like how the narrator's kind of integrated a little bit more into the story. It's like the narrator's telling us this story, and then we will have these cutaways back to the scenes. I also feel that the edits that they have where we cut back are so creative and fun. There's one that I believe is when we're in the church. I think it's like a cross window, and it like opens apart to reveal the narrator. And I was like, dude, there are so many little visual elements in this film that really add to the character and the tone of it. And they're not afraid to kind of get a little crazy, get a little weird with the sets. They're not afraid to kind of poke fun at the genre as well, because we do live in the world of science fiction with Rocky Horror, and that is an important element of the story. And in fact, some of the elements of this story that when I went back to revisit it and I was thinking about some of the coercion that happens, the way Frank-N-Furter behaves, and how we often celebrate him as this kind of gay icon in the LGBT plus community, but he is very much a villain in the movie. You have to understand that part of what we're doing with Rocky Horror is also paying homage to classic science fiction. And with that comes those tropes. And so Frank-N-Furter does become this mad scientist. And it also is a lot about sexual freedom and freedom in general, acceptance, oppression, how we deal with those things, just letting yourself live and live lavishly. And because there is a hedonistic quality, of course, to the way that Frank-N-Furter behaves, what I love about the film is that while it celebrates the positives of hedonism and indulging at times instead of being so straight-laced, it also plays with the idea of the negative elements of being hedonistic and the follies of these characters. And it's not just Frank-N-Furter that falls prey to it either. Kind of everyone does. All of these characters reveal kind of a bit of a darker side of themselves throughout the movie. So while Frank-N-Furter is a villain and yet is also a celebrated cultural gay icon, he's not the only villain. So it doesn't fall into the category for me of being too tropey in the sense of like, oh, the gay villain, here he comes. He's crazy. He's simply too much. Of course, I will say his lifestyle's pretty extreme. Some would say, as Riff Raff sings, too extreme. But even he acknowledges that in the end. My favorite thing about Rocky Horror is definitely the music. I think the music is so catchy. It's so fun to sing. It's so fun to dance to. I feel compelled to sing it. Before I was doing this review, I was singing a few bars and I was like, no singing right now. But it's so good, the music in this show. And this film adaptation of it is no exception. I also feel like Tim Curry's performance in this movie as Frank-N-Furter, both vocally and as the character in the scenes, is just chef's kiss. We couldn't ask for a better Frank-N-Furter in our lives. Tim Curry is Frank-N-Furter. He fully embodies the character. And what I love about his portrayal is that he really does make it easy for you to fall in love with the guy. And you understand why so many of these people that have come into Frank-N-Furter's life have fallen for Frank and fallen into his web, fallen into his trap. But at the same time, there's a sincerity to him. And Tim Curry really understands the nuance of this character. He makes him a sympathetic villain. He understands why he does what he does. This musical is still as weird as ever for me, but there is a lot of depth that I noticed. I think I've picked up on residually, but I've never really reflected as much as I have now, because now that I'm doing this review, I have to, think about it. And there's just so many themes in this movie and so much that it has to say. It talks about gender. It talks about romance. It talks about oppression. It talks about sexual liberty and freedom. It talks about our expectations, conformity, breaking conformity. What does that mean? The normal versus the bizarre. What does it actually mean to be bizarre? Is it more that people just want to live their lives? I think so. How do we define bizarre? And ultimately, I think it's about coming to terms with who you really are and accepting yourself and simply seeking that acceptance from others. I think a lot of the times that Frank-N-Furter is driven to these very violent acts because he has never really felt accepted, because he also struggles to maybe accept and love himself. And so he seeks that in other people. It's like Columbia says, you're like a sponge. You just take, and take until there's nothing left. He is a sponge. He does just take and take and take. But he does it because there is an emptiness in him. There's this hole. And when he creates Rocky, using parts of Eddie, which is really messed up, and then later literally serves Eddie up, kind of tormenting people, I think that Frank-N-Furter just likes to get a rise out of people because he needs to be the center of attention, because he doesn't feel loved, because there is an emptiness within him that eats away at him. But like I said, there are also the elements of the fact of him being a mad scientist that come into play. And there's just surprisingly a lot of depth for a film that also is very campy and very goofy. There's a lot that it has to say about the world, about society, and about how we see ourselves and how we see others, and how we other different groups of people from ourselves. And that is something that I really appreciate about it. It is also weirdly an adaptation of Frankenstein, because Frank-N-Furter is literally a version of Victor von Frankenstein who brings his creation to life, who is the not so monstrous Rocky, title of the musical. And Rocky is this very sweet creature who's just born, has no idea what he's doing, and is immediately thrown into this world of kind of depravity and hedonism, and is just trying to find his place in life. And I think it's also interesting because Frank-N-Furter kind of makes the most straight seeming man that is clearly like this idea of what is the most manly thing that he can create. But in doing so, he also creates the idea of like a manly man that loves the ladies. And so Rocky falls for Janet instead of necessarily falling for Frank. Although clearly Rocky still loves Frank, loves him as his creator, and I think kind of as a lover. It's weird, that whole element. There's a lot of things that are weird. I won't get into too many of those things here too much because it is YouTube and some of these things are quite adult themes. But if you haven't watched the Rocky Horror Picture Show before, I hope that this gave you a little bit of insight into what the film is like and why I love it, and makes you want to watch it. I don't think I've said anything that's like too crazy spoilery, but really for me, the Rocky Horror Picture Show is less about the story than it's about certain moments and also the themes and how those are communicated. I think that's what really makes this musical sing, so to speak. Overall, I'd give this one a 5 out of 5. It is a cult classic, and it also always has been a cult classic for me. And also, apparently it was a success. I didn't know at its release it was so successful, but it was. It just took a bit of time to get there. But yeah, it is a film that I've loved for over 20 years. And while rewatching it the other day, gotta say, still love it. Still a 5 out of 5 for me. So that's where I stand on Rocky Horror. Let me know your thoughts on this musical if you've watched it down in the comments below. And if you haven't, how do you feel about musicals? Let me know down in those comments. I'll see you down there. And until next time, friends, as always, stay nerdy. Bye. And if you like when I talk about Frankenstein stories, I did just talk about Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein. And this is one of my favorite reviews I've ever filmed. So you should check it out.